Wonderful. Well, good morning, and thank you for this time together and inviting us. Again, I am Jessica Zimmerly. I'm the Program and Outreach Director at Earth Ministry and Washington Interfaith Power and Light. And like Deb said, we are the Washington State affiliate of the National Interfaith Power and Light Network. Much of our work is focused here in Washington State. We do some on the federal level. But today I'll be talking about our legislative advocacy. Just in case you're not familiar with Earth Ministry and WAIPL, we're statewide. We are multi-faith and increasingly living into our call to multi-faith community. We've been doing faithful advocacy for a good 15, maybe 17 years now. And our approach to advocacy is really centered on how we can bring forward values that are guided by our different spiritual traditions to resonate with the hearts of decision makers and to tell our stories in ways that are compelling and invites in decision makers beyond the normal political divides. We do all of our advocacy through coalition partnerships with secular environmental organizations. So our work in the state legislature is primarily through the Environmental Priorities Coalition. And this is the main group of all of the different environmental organizations in our state that come together. We have a democratic process of selecting priority legislation to focus on together each year to build collective power and be in collaboration. We also do then our own work supporting various faith-based organizations in their advocacy. So we've been getting to hang out more with Justice Washington in our monthly advocacy partners check-ins, and we're holding that space for all these different faith-based groups like the Faith Action Network, the Washington Catholic Conference, Justice Washington, and many others to come together so that we can be all on the same page. So with that, that's our brief background. And today I'm going to divide what I speak about kind of into three brief sections. So first, I'll talk about what we selected as our priority bills. Unfortunately, they did not pass, but it's a groundwork effort, right? So we'll be back. Then we'll talk about what we did pass, and then a few things that got caught up in the process and didn't make it through, but got further this year. May I please have screen share powers?
Where did you go?
And while I'm pulling up my slides, I'll just pause in case anyone has questions about who we are and how we approach advocacy.
Did I do that?
Don't worry, Deb, I got it.
Sorry, I think that was my bad.
Oh.
I went to click share screen and instead it
Did you get co-host?
Yes.
Okay. Just to say too that there are several UU congregations who are a part of Earth Ministries. So if your congregation is not, that might be something you want to look into.
Yeah, we appreciate that, Deb. And Maddie Smith, who is our operations and development manager, is UU, so is most active in supporting our UU communities. And now let me see if my slides will up here. Okay, do you see a slide? Yes, thanks, Elle. Okay. So at the start of the session, we came together and selected our priority bills. We do this each year to kind of hone in our focus. As we know, there's so much good legislation out there, but we really look to certain parts of our value system, our justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion statement to guide what we select as our top bills. So I'll share what each of these are and then kind of why we selected them. The first was the Lorraine Loomis Act for Salmon Recovery. And this was developed in partnership with Native nations through the governor's office. And so good consultation with Northwest tribes is really important to us. And that is a reason that we selected it as a priority. What it would do is look at salmon recovery through habitat along riparian zones. So essentially it's looking at our warming waters, thanks to climate change, hydro, other issues, and address certain zones to try to keep waters cooler through the vegetation around the riparian habitats. This unfortunately did not make it very far early on. We'll have some work to do in communications with the ag community over the coming year in order to have some more groundwork for it to be brought back forward next year. But it was something that was supported across the many different Native nations, which is important. And you know, for me personally, I'll just say the consultation was done with the right people, in that tribes were on at the table for it, and then the ag community was upset that they weren't as included. Our second priority is the Energy for All. This is House Bill 1490, and it was led by Front and Centered. Front and Centered, if you're not familiar with them, I really encourage you to check them out and get on their mailing list. They are a coalition of organizations that are representing frontline communities in the climate crisis. So primarily communities of color, low-income folks, folks with differing abilities, coming together for a really justice-focused approach to how we transition off of fossil fuels. And Energy for All is essentially a permanent utility shutoff moratorium, which is something that we've seen here in Washington during the COVID-19 pandemic. This would make that permanent so that there would be a universal right to energy access and affordability. The mechanism through which they would do that is that no matter what utility you are a part of, your energy bill would be capped at 3% of your household income. Low-income communities and households with members with disabilities see up to a 10% percentage of how much they're putting towards utilities, whereas the state average and what we want to see is more at 3%. So this was a real step for us at Earth Ministry WAIPL into, you know, kind of out of our normal bound of thinking of what climate justice looks like. You know, we had some questions of like, oh, this seems more like a housing issue or in our different economic justice issue areas. But for us, it's really important as we transition off of fossil fuels that we be sure we do so in a way that's equitable and just, and ensuring good access to energy is an important component of that. And then finally, the Renew Act is Senate Bill 5697, and this is looking at an overhaul of Washington State's recycling system, which we know is something we are in need of. So the goal is to reduce waste and increase how reusable, recyclable, or compostable product packaging is. Packaging is a huge percentage of the waste that we produce. And often as consumers, we just don't have a choice. If you want to buy yogurt, it's in a plastic tub, right? So it would look at shifting the burden of responsibility to manufacturers and providing incentives based on how reusable, recyclable, compostable their products are, with a goal of 100% of all packaging and paper products made or sold in Washington being reusable, recyclable, or compostable by 2031. So this bill will be one that comes back. All of these will be bills that come back and that we'll work on next year. We got good conversations going. As you might be aware, it was a short legislative session, so we didn't have a lot of time, just 60 days. And with ongoing pandemic and virtual settings, you know, we worked with what we had. So I feel good about how the faith community showed up for these 3 bills and how we worked together across various different traditions and organizations to support them and to raise them up really as moral issues that resonate across our various traditions. But I do want to go into what we did end up accomplishing together. So because our bills didn't make it, early in the process, so there are multiple cutoff dates in our state legislature. So those stalled early enough, we were able to shift to some other bills that we were working on together. And of those, we got to celebrate some good wins. So the first is looking at our Growth Management Act and land use in our state. And this was Senate Bill 5042, which closed a loophole that allowed urban sprawl. So essentially, there's a whole permitting process for if you want to build out. And there was this loophole where the ball got rolling before the permits were really issued. And that was a challenge for protecting wildlands, ecosystems, communities, and also would end up imposing a lot of costs on communities to support that development. So this closes that loophole and essentially will help the Growth Management Act work more as it is intended and have that oversight before new development is underway. Next, we are happy to have passed House Bill 1694. So this is looking at toxic chemical reform, which is one of Earth Ministry WAIPL's focus issue areas. And so what this will do is accelerate the timeline for an existing program, which was from a bill that we passed a few years back. So the Safer Products for Washington program is underway. We just wrapped up our first cycle of it. And what it does is look at chemicals of concern in consumer products. So with this first round, we were really focused on things like textiles and carpets and looking at the things that especially our young ones are in really close contact with and ensuring there's not that traditional Scotchgard anti-stain approach, which has these carcinogenic chemicals. So with this bill that is moving up the timeline, we are going to cut the timeline in half for the second round of this program. So previously it would not have started until 2025. Now it's going to be implemented by 2025. So this is good news for all of life and our waterways as well, which see essentially permanent contamination by chemicals like PFAS. And then last is the Move Ahead Washington transportation package. So transportation was a big part of the conversation late in the legislative session. I'm interested to hear what Representative Rammel will have to share about this. But we did pass a $17 billion transportation funding package. And Earth Ministry WAIPL's approach with this was to really follow the leadership of Front and Center, that coalition I mentioned that's working on energy for all. They had a primary message of wanting to focus on transit and accessibility and to not have funding for any new or expanded highways in already overburdened communities. So we didn't fully see that manifest, but we did see really historic investments that do put more into our transit systems than previously. So we have $5 billion allocated to public transportation and also active transportation. So this is like good sidewalks, where if you're somebody who uses a wheelchair to get around, you can get to the bus stop on a sidewalk and not have to go in the street, etc. So there is a historic level of investment. It does still also fund some new and continuing highway expansion. So there are pros and cons, but we did push the envelope further than we've gone before. The other thing I want to share is that they did also pass a budget proviso. So in the rest of this year, now through December, I guess, there is funding for a study to be conducted by the Department of Transportation that will define what a frequent and accessible public transportation system standard should look like, and having within that identifying gaps by race and age and ability. So that will give us more information to look at increasingly putting more towards our transit and where it's needed, rather than our status quo transportation based on fossil fuels. Okay, I didn't make slides for these, but there's a couple other bills that I'll just briefly mention that we worked on that got further towards the end. I think Representative Rammel will speak to this one, but House Bill 1099 was another update to the Growth Management Act, and it was focused on climate and would have ensured that communities are planning in ways to reduce climate pollution. It got really far this year and then got stuck at the very end. Bizarrely, the Senate did this strange thing where they took out any reference to climate in this bill, which is all about climate. And so when you have amendments to a bill that makes it significantly different than what it was previously passed as in its other chamber, there's a process of concurrence. And this bill did not find resolution in the concurrence process. So it stalled at the very end. Just another that I'll mention is around more toxics work. Senate Bill 5703 was looking at banning toxic chemicals in cosmetics. This made it as far as the opposite chamber finance committee, but then stalled at that point. So this is something we'll be picking up again next year, as we know that we don't want toxic chemicals and things that we're directly putting on our bodies. And then finally, we did good work around targeted building electrification. Gratitude goes to Representative Rammel, who was a prime sponsor on House Bill 1767, which is looking at customer support for electrification. So this stalled, but is something that is really important to pick up, as buildings are our fastest growing sector for pollution.
So what was that number again, Jessica?
For building electrification is 1767. And I know that that is a lot of rundown that I just gave you in a short window of time. So I am going to drop into the chat Earth Ministry and WAIPL's legislative priority web page. And if you visit this site, you will see all of the bills that we worked on and more information about them. You can see how far they got in the process. And also there's fact sheets and things that you can download if you want to learn in more detail.